Hello, friend. I'm glad you're here. Settle your shoulders, loosen your jaw, and let your breath find a slow, steady rhythm. Imagine the room dimming to a gentle twilight, the kind that makes the world quiet around the edges. Tonight, we'll drift through a tender question that sounds bold but lands softly. Why might humanity never leave the Milky Way? Not as a warning, but as a lullaby of scale gravity's deep wells. Distances that outlast empires, the speed limits baked into light, and the way fragile bodies carry stubborn hopes across impossible dark. We'll move unhurried, like a boat on a black glass lake, pausing where the stars thicken, lingering where the mind loosens its grip and wonder does the holding. If these calm explorations keep you company, a gentle tap on like and subscribe helps other sleepy travelers find their way here without breaking the hush. For now, let the blankets tuck you in, let the breath do its quiet work, and let the galaxy become a slow-turning lantern above us. When you're ready, we'll begin. Settle a little deeper and feel the blankets learn your shape. Our cities hum, our farms breathe in seasons, our networks whisper through cables and sky, and it can feel as if the world is a well-tuned lullaby that will play forever. Yet the tune is balanced on a thin reed of stability climate that stays mostly steady, crops that know roughly when to wake, machines that depend on silent, faithful electricity. The quiet is real, but so are the large, unruly forces that do not ask our permission. Somewhere in the dark, a stone with an ancient orbit might be thinking of us without knowing our name. Beneath distant fields, a caldera keeps its slow calendar. On the face of our star, magnetic fields braid and unbraid, storing tempers they sometimes forget to control. None of this is a warning whispered to frighten you to wakefulness. It's the soft truth that the universe is big enough to hold both comfort and hazard, and that our place within it is a kind of brave, ordinary miracle. Imagine the planetary story as a lantern carried through high wind. Most nights, the flame is steady. Now and then, a gust tries its luck. An asteroid larger than a city would not need long to redraw our maps. A supervolcano could darken noon, let ash skate across oceans, and ask wheat and rice to pause their music for a season too long. A solar tantrum, something like the great storms the sun has thrown before, could comb through our circuits and leave them tangled, mute, and stubborn. Lights would hesitate, hospitals would lean on generators that cough and tire, satellites would forget their jobs, and the old ways of sending a letter might suddenly look brave again. It isn't melodrama to say so. It's the grown-up tone of astronomy, a field that listens for long rhythms and learns from scars. Human minds are fabulous at leaping out of the way of tigers that exist mostly in memory. Our senses sharpen for the snap of the twig, the rush of feet, the glint of teeth. We are tuned to the quick and the close. But the slow and the huge, those ask for a different kind of attention. Geology keeps time like a cathedral bell you only notice if you stay still. Orbital mechanics writes poems in centuries. The brain that kept your ancestor alive on a savanna does not, by default, tremble at a comet that returns every few thousand years. So a strange mismatch appears. The dangers most likely to bruise a single day feel urgent. The dangers that could nudge a whole century off balance feel unreal until they arrive. There is a quirk with a tidy name that psychologists like to keep nearby, the availability heuristic. It's only a fancy label for something you've noticed how easily remembered stories loom larger than they should. If news and conversation keep the same images polished, the mind will use their shine to measure risk. A crash with a headline glows brighter than a probability printed in a quiet paper. A dramatic act by one person occupies more room and thought than the patient work of a fault line preparing a surprise. The bias is not a moral failure. It's a side effect of being alive in a body with a limited attention span, but it means we tend to rank the spectacular over the significant, the violent week over the dangerous century. Media, for understandable reasons, prefers the flame to the ember. A moment you can film becomes a moment you can sell, and hours are fragile merchandise. A solar storm that might arrive next year or in 50 is hard to paint. A hillside that will eventually slide, a forest whose dryness is a fuse, a rock that hums past Earth twice before aiming closer. These are not easy to put between commercials. Classrooms carry their own burdens. There isn't always time to teach how an orbit precesses, how dust in the stratosphere reshapes warmth and rain, how Earth's magnetic field sometimes quivers and rearranges its lines, like a harpist changing a song. Many people walk into adulthood without hearing the names of the old disasters that still shape the planet's face. The ash beds left by truly colossal eruptions, the craters softened by rain and time, the tree rings that quietly record a solar outburst that once made northern skies glow like curtains. If you've heard of the Carrington event, it might be a footnote, a 19th century storm of solar origin that turned night to an electric dawn and set telegraph papers smoking. If you know the Siberian forest that fell all at once in the early 20th century, you hold an echo of Tunguska, a blast likely born of a visitor from space dissolving in the sky. If you've walked through a museum and paused by the skeleton of a creature that will never walk again, you've touched the long consequences of older catastrophes, events that don't fit into a news cycle because they birthed the cameras that would have filmed them. The world has endured impacts and winters and long afternoons of fire. Life didn't keep a perfect record, but it kept moving. That persistence is not the opposite of fragility. It's a companion to it. Earth is a tightrope walker who has crossed a canyon many times. The rope is frayed in places, and the canyon is wide, and still the walker continues, adjusting a little, learning which way the wind likes to turn. Our planet has been hot when it preferred cool, cold when it wished for mild. It has been struck and shaken and thought about by no one, and nevertheless it grew forests, invented feathers, tried out flowers, sculpted insects that whistle, and mammals that hold their young the way a thought holds a secret. Mass extinctions have happened more than once. Each time, the cast of characters changed, but the play went on, and somewhere in the wings, a stubborn idea waited for its cue. Complex life will try again. When you breathe in, you're borrowing atoms that were once part of ancient oceans and clouds, and further back, part of a giant star that died with enough drama to seed this corner of space with the raw materials for bones and memory. The iron in your blood remembers a furnace that made light by the ton and then tore itself apart to give that iron to the dark. The calcium that allows a muscle to contract felt pressure beyond anything a mountain can imagine. The carbon that gives you structure and possibility spent time as invisible gas in a different era's sky. You are a reassembled star, humming softly on a mattress, trying to understand its own song. That is not just pretty language, it is the chemistry of the neighborhood. Because the neighborhood is kinetic, the same physics that makes the delicate lattice inside a snowflake shapes the rings of Saturn, those pale, hushed highways of ice that catch sunlight like a choir catches breath. The aurora that sweeps the polar night is not separate from the storms that can trouble our power lines. It is the harmless, magnificent edge of the same dance. Magnetic fields twist, charged particles surf along them, The sky responds with curtains that fold and unfold so gently that even the words feel the need to whisper. In that sense, beauty and danger are siblings. The processes that carve can also caress. The universe works with a limited set of tools: gravity, electromagnetism, the push and pull of tiny particles, and from those tools come both the fragile and the grand. None of this means we are helpless. Recognizing scale doesn't erase agency, it clarifies it. A species can learn to map the orbits of near-Earth objects and track their approaches the way a sailor learns to watch the moon over the tide. A species can teach stones to sail small nudges, gravity assists, patient shepherding years in advance so that a collision becomes a polite passing at a distance. A species can build telescopes that listen for the sun's moods and agree, quietly, to prepare. Transformers with better armor, procedures that let satellites rest during the worst of the weather. Spares kept where storms cannot reach. The work is practical, almost boring in the details, but boring things are what hold the world together. There is also the long project, not escape, but extension. We are not ashamed to love Earth so much that we want to make backups of its music. A garden is not insulted by a cutting planted in another pot. It is protected. Settlements on Mars, if we manage them with humility and patience, would not be a rejection of home, but a promise to home, that a single fire or flood will not silence the song. Rotating habitats, anchored in the calm eddies of gravity. Places where sunlight and spin can conspire to make fields, and mornings could become little libraries of life, small, tender, and capable of repair. These are not deliverances from difficulty. They are long, careful spells of engineering and cooperation, with problems to solve at every scale, from plumbing to politics. But they are possible in the same way bridges are possible when one learns the river. There are side effects that look like gifts. A fuller catalog of asteroids, drawn not just for defense but for curiosity, tells us what the solar system is made of in granular detail. Some bodies are loose rubble, others are monoliths. Still, others are something in between, a lesson for how to touch them, how to mine them gently if we must, and how to leave them untroubled when we can. Learning to collect sunlight in space and beam it, softened and safe, to the places that need power, would let us turn some engines off down here and let the air practice being cleaner. Factories that float could take the dirtiest work and move it to places where waste can be better contained and recycled, where a river isn't wading downstream with fish and children. Each technique born for survival ends up teaching us a better way to be at home. Studying the other worlds nearby is a kind of mirror work. The bruised face of Mars teaches aridity and loss. The thick, smothering veil of Venus teaches how heat can trap itself. The icy moons with oceans beneath their shells teach different lessons about energy and chemistry and the patience of life. Even the empty, airless rock of our moon is a diary of impacts Earth long ago forgot because weather is tidy and likes to clean the slate. To read these diaries is to understand our own climate with more precision and our own geology with more tenderness. The more we know about how planets behave, the less easily we are surprised by the moods of our own. All of this sits inside a wider reflection that doesn't ask to be solved so much as held. We live in a universe that is at once dangerous and generous. It does not mind if we take it personally. It cannot. But we can choose to answer its indifference with attention. We can decide that fragility is not a reason to despair. It is a reason to cherish. When a sunset finds a layer of dust high in the air and paints it into a color we do not have a proper name for, That beauty is not a promise that nothing bad will happen. It is a demonstration of how much can still be offered while we have the chance to notice. When you laugh with someone you love, you are, in a small way, defying statistics. You are adding a datum that does not fit in a model of extinction or impact or drought. You are saying, in the storm, there is a table with warm light and 2 chairs. If you listen closely, the Milky Way makes no sound you can hear with ears, yet it has a rhythm, the sweep of its arms, the slow drift of stars, the rise and fall of gas clouds that someday might light. Inside that long rhythm, we have built a short one. Working hours and weekends, dinners and birthdays, bedtimes and first days of school. The contrast is not an error. It's a design we made for ourselves. The cosmic timescale does not know tired shoulders and favorite mugs. We do. That is our contribution, to take enormous, unsentimental processes and weave from them meaning that fits into a human life. When we study the sky for threats, we are not only protecting power grids, we are protecting small rituals and local joys. The reason this matters to the question of crossing the galaxy is quiet but important. A species that learns to live with risk at home learns to defend itself from rocks and flares, and ash learns also to respect limits. Distance is not merely space stretched, it is difficulty multiplied. Interstellar travel would demand everything we know about patience, redundancy, ecology, and repair. It would require the kindnesses we teach ourselves during blackouts and storms, the community formed in neighborhoods when the power flickers, the way strangers share candles and chargers and food. If there is a path to other stars, it is paved with the same habits that keep a town gentle during a hard winter. The galaxy is a library with doors that open slowly, and the library card is responsibility. So you can rest with this while the room grows softer. The world is not safe in the way a locked drawer is safe. It is safe the way a boat is safe when the crew agrees how to sail. We have inherited a vessel that has crossed rough water before. It creaks now and then. The sails need patching. The charts need updates written in tidy hands. There are storms we cannot prevent, but can steer through with less damage if we know the signs. There are reefs we can mark for those who come later. There are also ordinary mornings with clean light and fresh bread, and those mornings are held up on subtle scaffolding science, memory, cooperation built by people who loved their children enough to think in decades. Close your eyes to the chatter of danger as spectacle, and let the quieter message stay. We are small, yes, and breakable, yes, and yet capable of planning, of tenderness, stretched across time. The same universe that forged the iron in your blood also taught seeds how to wait for spring, whales how to sing across deserts of water, and you how to care for a face that grows older. If a stone in space is a threat, it is also a lesson in momentum and patience. If a volcano is a risk, it is also a story about the deep interior of a planet that has kept us warm and fertile. If the sun sometimes snarls, it more often pours out steady light that paints leaves and roofs and the quiet curve of a sleeping shoulder. Let the thought rest like a hand on your back. Fragility does not cancel meaning, it multiplies it. Every conversation, every experiment, every patient repair is a vote for continuation. We do not need guarantees to love this place. We need only the sense that effort matters, that knowledge grows, that there are ways to make tomorrow a little harder to break. Somewhere above the roofline, the galaxy turns, untroubled by our names, and yet here we are, giving it some. You are part of that giving, simply by listening and breathing and allowing star-forged atoms to do their small, exquisite work of being alive. Step into the hush of evening and let the sky be a gentle teacher. When a bright lantern rises in the west and you recognize Venus, hold two thoughts at once like you might cup two small flames. It gleams like a jewel, steady and calm. It is also a furnace under a lid, a world whose clouds are laced with acid, whose pressure would press a human flat, whose heat could melt soft metals into sorrowful puddles. That contradiction is not a trick, it's the point. Beauty is what the eye receives. Truth is what patience learns. The night invites both soft radiance on your retina, quiet facts resting behind the light like a hand at your back, steadying and real. Let your gaze drift to the rust-tinged ember of Mars. Across that distance, the planet looks tender, a coal that refuses to die. Up close, it keeps a different diary. Craters overlap craters like faded rings on old wood. Valleys split the equator with wounds so long you could line continents inside them. The air is thin and earnest, the kind that loses its grip on warmth each evening and cannot promise much by day. Once, long ago, Mars held more thicker skies, rivers that braided, basins that remembered rain. Then the shield that kept its breath safe faltered, and the sun, in the ordinary way stars behave, worried at that weakness until the atmosphere thinned and the surface grew bare. The red you see is iron dust, oxidized stone that, in a sense, learned how to rust beneath an open sky. A different brightness announces Jupiter, slow and confident, rising like a thought you cannot ignore. Its gravity is a shepherd and sometimes a wolf, both roles honestly held. For ages, it has nudged wandering ice and rock into safer lanes, turning dangerous approaches into wide misses. It has also flung the occasional body inward, because a massive world does not only protect, it rearranges. Look at its bands, and the storm that has outlived empires. That pale, swirling eye could swallow Earth and still hunger. On Jupiter, wind is architecture, lightning is common law. Yet the same heft that torments its own weather helps keep our inner lanes less crowded. A protector is rarely simple. The moon, meanwhile, hangs like a quiet punctuation mark. Its glow is borrowed sunlight. Its story is a bruise that never fully faded. Once upon a hot and early time, a collision likely tore splinters from the face of young Earth and taught them a new way to be together, circling. That violence left behind a companion whose pull tugs on oceans and time. Tides lifted shorelines and set rhythms that life could learn. Some of our earliest chemical rehearsals might have taken place in those tidal pools, stirred twice daily by a satellite born from disaster. It is a sober magic, a catastrophe that made a clock for water and a clock that made room for complexity. Keeping these truths in mind does not darken the night, it deepens it. The sky is not a decoration, it's a ledger. The same ballet that paints a planet into evening also writes chapters about pressure and heat, about impacts and long winters, about the engineering of orbits and the negotiations of fields and particles. Our days are small beads on that thread. The scale dwarfs us. It does not insult us. If anything, it enlarges the value of every conversation, every meal, every kindness shared while our star burns in its patient way and our world keeps time against the odds. The universe, if you list its habits, seems fond of difficult tests. Stones fall from far away, fields connect across space and twitch with sudden tempers, mountains breathe ash, poles wander, and now and then flip. Yet the same universe gave us questions, and then gave us the stubbornness to ask them better. We built instruments that can hear the sun clear its magnetic throat, that can sketch the path of a rock the size of a hill a decade before it would become a headline, that can measure the faint frown of gravity as a distant planet crosses a distant star. We learned how to name risk without surrendering to it, how to hold fear loosely enough that curiosity can still step forward. If Mars feels like the next page of that work, let it be read with honest eyes. Those two little moons, Phobos and Deimos, look more like overachieving boulders than like the spheres in children's books. Their shapes betray their origins. Most likely, they were captured wanderers, tugged off their old roots by Mars's invitation and told to stay. Phobos keeps uncomfortably close company, so close that tides pull on it the way breath pulls on a reed. Little by little, its orbit decays. In the deep future, 50 million years is both a blink and an ocean. Phobos will unmake itself or fall. If it shreds, Mars may wear a ring for a while, a temporary necklace of grief. If it dives, the impact will write a fresh crater into maps and send dust to the sky. Deimos, farther out and more relaxed, will keep watching with the patience that distance affords. The surface below those moons repeats a theme, ancient violence recorded with solemn care. In the north lies a basin so broad it is difficult to hold in mind. Many think a colossal strike early in the planet's life scratched that hemisphere into a different mood, an event whose energies we can only approach with metaphors and numbers that go numb if held too tightly. Whether single blow or sequence, the consequence was clear enough. A shock to the atmosphere, a wound to the magnetic heart, a future where space itself would pick the pocket of the sky more easily. Along the equator, Valles Marineris splits the crust into a system of chasms so long you could walk along their edge for months and never see the same horizon twice. These are not canyons written primarily by water's patient knife. They are the Earth-like suggestion of tectonics and uplift. Crust stretched and fractured by the weight of volcanic provinces nearby, and by stresses that got out of hand. Mars wears those marks the way an old tree wears, lightning scars evidence of energy finding a path. You can imagine the aftershocks as a kind of global ache. Waves of motion would have circled the planet and circled again, the ground briefly forgetting how to be still. Dust would have walked into the sky and stayed there, changing light into a duller, colder thing. Months, years, time would recover, but not as it was. Landscapes remember, and Mars remembers like a stoic, plainly, with minimal fuss, in the language of plains and cliffs. Not all violence belongs to rocks and mantle. The star that warms our mornings and grows our food is a disciplined fire that sometimes forgets itself. The sun stores magnetic energy the way a muscle stores tension. Then, abruptly, it releases it. A flare is light and heat, announced with startling speed. A coronal mass ejection is the heavier gesture, the sun tossing a cloud of charged particles into the yard and letting it run. Most days, Earth's magnetic field receives these visitors with firm hospitality, redirecting and diffusing, turning some of that encounter into lights at the poles that braid the sky. But large storms have a way of finding our weak spots, particularly now that our lives lean so heavily on electronics and long wires stretched across continents. A century and a half ago, the Carrington storm startled humans who had woven the first long-distance electric nervous system. Telegraphs hissed and sparked. Paper burned at desks where nothing should have burned. Messages leapt wires without batteries. Night glowed in latitudes where nights usually behave. Imagine that temperament meeting a world of satellites, microchips, GPS timing, financial transactions that travel in pulses of light. Some of our machines would shrug and return to work, some would sulk and recover, some would refuse and need careful replacement. Transformers would face stresses they were not designed to greet. We have plans, and those plans help, but preparedness is always a conversation we should keep having, quietly and without drama, because the sun does not check our calendars before it chooses to stretch. Coronal mass ejections carry more than inconvenience. A storm, sufficiently strong, given a target with a weakened shield, can strip away gases, atom by atom, the way wind thins a scarf. Mars likely lost much of its early atmosphere this way when its global magnetic field faded. The lesson is not that we should be afraid each time a sunspot yawns. It's that protection matters, and that fields, like everything else, have moods and histories. Earth's magnetic field is a dynamic sculpture generated by motion in the molten outer core. It wanders, it strengthens, weakens, and sometimes reverses. Rocks hold these switches as fossil compass needles frozen in place. During a reversal, the field does not vanish, but it can become patchy and faint in places, leaving the upper air more exposed to charged particles that like to meddle. There is evidence that the field's strength has trended downward over a couple of millennia. That number is not a prophecy. It's a nudge to keep measuring and to keep our technology well armored and our expectations humble. Even in weak times, life persists. What changes is the choreography, how much radiation aircraft crews might see on polar routes, how satellites choose their orbits, how carefully we watch the ozone that shields soft tissues from harsh light. Holding all of this in a drowsy mind need not invite dread. It invites proportion. Wind moves across prairie grass. Oceans change their mind twice a day. Continents shrug every so often. The sun speaks in pulses. Against that background, a human day is fragile and miraculous. A power grid hums because thousands of pieces agree to behave. A hospital stays bright because engineers thought about storms when the sky was clear. A spacecraft survives a flare because someone, years before launch, decided to add a margin of safety that didn't look necessary until it did. These are not grand gestures. They are the quiet discipline of a species that intends to keep showing up. When you hold a warm mug and step outdoors and let your eyes adjust, the sky is not trying to scare you. It is offering context. Venus shines and invites awe. Behind the awe is chemistry and weather learned to an extreme. Mars glows and invites stories. Behind the stories is geology that took both sudden blows and long grief and turned them into mesas and dunes. Jupiter rises and invites respect. Behind the respect is a gravity well that both threatens and protects. The moon breathes silver on rooftops and invites tenderness. Behind the tenderness is a history of shock and the gift of tides. The dance is not gentle, the spectacle is, and that's enough for the heart to rest on, while the mind acknowledges the rest. If all of this sounds like an argument for caution, it is, and for courage. Caution keeps our circuits grounded and our policies patient. Courage keeps our eyes on the horizon and our hands steady on telescopes and instruments, our curiosity funded and our training rehearsed. Somewhere tomorrow, a student will run a simulation and notice a near-Earth object's path is more complicated than yesterday's math suggested. Somewhere else, a lineman will install a device that makes a transformer less vulnerable to currents that do not belong. In a clean room, a satellite will be wrapped in layers like a winter traveler, ready to shrug off the sun's occasional scold. Each act is small. Together, they are culture, an agreement to be attentive to the world as it is, not only as it feels on calm nights. You do not need to memorize names or dates to live with this knowledge. It is enough to remember that the serene face of the sky is earned by fields that fold around the planet, by a mantle that still stirs, by oceans that move heat where it is needed, by a moon that tightens and loosens tides, by a giant planet that occupies a dangerous seat at the outer table. It is also earned by people, many of whom will never be famous, who choose to become translators between hazard and habitability. They read graphs in the music of sunspots. They design fail-safes. They insist on drills. They keep spare parts where storms cannot reach. Their work lets children sleep through geomagnetic murmurs and allows an old couple to keep their porch light on during a solar wind's arrival. Think of Mars again, not as a grave, but as a book that did not close after the first act. Its moons circle in unequal steps. Its sky still carries dust high enough to make sunsets go long and blue. Robot emissaries roll carefully, tasting rocks older than any story we tell. The planet is not dead. It is quiet, and quiet worlds are generous to study. They hold still long enough for us to see cause and effect without 1,000 overlapping signals. In learning how Mars lost what it once had, we learn how to keep what we have and how to choose technologies that partner with fields and winds instead of daring them to falter. The sun will rise again tomorrow, not because it owes us anything, but because that's what it does. Its light will climb walls and warm leaves and turn the dull into the gleaming for a few hours. Somewhere deep inside, magnetic ropes will twist and, perhaps, relax without incident. Somewhere above the poles, quiet curtains will fold and unfold where no one is looking. Somewhere in the magnetosphere, a line will reconnect and spit a little energy toward the night. These are ordinary miracles. They make possible the extraordinary miracle, a species that goes to sleep under a dangerous sky and wakes with enough trust to make breakfast, go to work, and plan for decades. Let the knowledge sit beside you like a calm friend. The solar system is not kind and not cruel. It is busy. It has room for our fears, and it has room for our projects. We can keep two thoughts in our hands without burning them. We are vulnerable, and we are capable. Stars will throw their weather, planets will keep their scars, fields will shift and, in time, return. In the meantime, we tell each other what we've learned. We practice the drills. We stare at the night and let wonder be the undertone, not panic. If the universe sometimes seems to be in the business of ending things, it is also in the business of beginning them. We are evidence of both, standing in the cool air, breathing star-made breath, quietly determined to belong here a little longer. Loosen your jaw and let your shoulders settle as the night opens like a slow book. The same sky that comforts also keeps a stern ledger, and a pair of small, harsh lessons wait very close to home. One world shines like a pearl at dusk and teaches what happens when protection fails. Another skates too near the fire and shows what heat and cold can do when they trade places without mercy. Holding these lessons lightly, as one holds a warm mug in both hands, is enough. Venus glows with operatic confidence, steady, bright, the first star that isn't a star to greet evening. The surface beneath that gentle light is a furnace sealed by its own breath. Temperatures hover in ranges that would soften lead. The air presses 90 times harder than the air at sea level here. The clouds are laced with droplets of sulfuric acid that would turn a bare hand to a memory. Yet the planet's early chapters may have been kind. Models and old hints in chemistry suggest oceans could once have lapped at volcanic shores, that rain might have fallen through a sky not so different from Earth's young sky. Over time, the sun grew a little brighter, as main sequence stars do, and Venus, closer in, took the heat. Volcanic exhalations stacked greenhouse gases high. Water evaporated faster than it could hide. Sunlight split vapor in the upper air. Hydrogen, too light to be held, fled to space. What remained was a thick carbon dioxide cloak and a feedback loop that galloped until even the rocks wanted to sweat. A few clues survive in the air there: an elevated ratio of heavy water to ordinary water, a forensic whisper that much hydrogen has escaped. The planet's rotation, slow and backwards compared to most, drags the atmosphere into dramatic winds aloft, while the surface broils in suffocating stillness. There is no global magnetic field to draw a protective curtain. The solar wind reaches in and plays rough. The lesson isn't that Venus is wicked, it's that climates are negotiations, and negotiations can fail. A small change in energy, repeated and reinforced, can tilt an entire world from lake blue to copper orange, from clouds that water to clouds that sting. When evening gifts you that bright point, you can let wonder and caution share the same breath. Shift your gaze inward to the fleet, scarred messenger near the Sunday. Mercury spends its days in extremes, the sort that make human materials sweat and shatter. When sunlight presses directly, its surface bakes far hotter than any natural place on Earth. When night arrives, drawn out and precise, the temperature dives past the kindest cold of polar winter. Without a thick atmosphere to shuffle heat, each half of the globe tells its own story, and the seam between day and night is a region of brutal contrast. The crust expands and contracts with such persistence that it has wrinkled like an old apple left too long in a bowl, great cliffs stepping across plains for hundreds of kilometers. The little world spins in a 3-to-2 rhythm with its year, 3 turns for every 2 laps around the Sunday. This resonance means a patient observer on Mercury would watch the sun do slow, strange tricks, pausing near noon, sliding backward for a while, then resuming its forward course. It is a sky designed to confuse clocks and test metal. These close-in parables soften us for the broader vulnerability we carry. So much of what threatens does not announce itself early. The Chicxulub impactor did not make an appointment. It arrived swift as a thought you didn't mean to think, releasing energies that turned forests to coals and skies to stone-filled winds. No telescope tracked it, no scientist drew its orbit in chalk. Life absorbs such blows by changing its cast. But for a species with cities and plans, the time scale of adaptation is not so generous. Only recently have we begun a disciplined sweep of near-Earth space, teaching machines to find small, fast shadows against bright, mottled backgrounds. The progress is real. The gaps are real too. Objects that approach from the sun's direction play hide-and-seek with our ground-based eyes. Daylight is not just bright. It is structured glare and roiling air, the worst stage for tiny actors. Dawn and dusk widen the window only a little, and turbulence smears the view. Space telescopes help, especially those that can look in thermal infrared, where sun-warmed rocks glow against cold space. Yet even there, the search is a marathon. The catalog grows, and the known dangers are placed in folders labeled with calm words: monitor, observe, no risk for a century, but the unknowns still exist. Persisting in the blank lines, between survey footprints. A winter morning in Russia offered a sharp reminder. A rock perhaps 20 meters across slipped in along a path. Our instruments weren't watching, moved faster than human reaction, and broke itself high over a city with a flash and a roar. Windows leapt inward. People stumbled and bled. Cameras meant to catch traffic recorded a sudden second sun. The energy release was measured afterward, in comparisons that make the heart tighten. But the lesson was plainer. Small is not harmless, and warning can be a luxury. That event asked engineers to think again about glass and blinds, asked teachers to talk about light and sound arriving at different times, asked planners how to send trustworthy messages in a hurry without stirring needless panic. Quiet improvements followed. Better sky surveys, better modeling of entry and breakup, calmer protocols. Programs now exist with names that sound like characters in a careful myth, offices that coordinate, missions that survey, plans that nudge. The approach is pragmatic. Find the big ones first, then keep shrinking the threshold. Use radar to refine orbits and measure shapes. Share ephemerides so that many observatories can take turns and none must lose sleep alone. Build an eye in space tuned to the wavelengths where dark rocks glow. Even with such work, completeness is not yet ours. Many medium-sized objects, the kind that threaten a region rather than a planet, are still waiting to be discovered, their paths coincidentally safe or unknowingly unkind. It is helpful to remember this without flinching, the way one remembers that lightning still exists, even if the last storm spared your street. Trouble rarely comes only from one direction. Not all long-period visitors are slow enough to court. Comets falling inward from distant reservoirs arrive like athletes who trained at high altitude. Fast, lean, confident. The Oort cloud, more a statistical fog than a neat shell, holds billions of icy bodies that feel the galaxy's tides and the nudges of passing stars. Now and then, those whispers turn a someday track into a soon track. A visitor will blaze through the inner system, shedding a tail the length of ideas, and then leave again for epochs. The warning can be measured in months, not decades. A large nucleus with speed to spare does not negotiate like a rock from the main belt. It demands a different playbook, one we have not yet written in ink. A famous comet in the late 90s, so bright it became a household name, was big enough, had it been misaligned by fate, to write a hard ending. We admired it from backyards and fields. We were right to admire it. We were also right to feel a chill run its quiet course down the spine of our plans. The temptation is to imagine a blockbuster rescue, a fleet of rockets, a heroic detonation, a last-minute cheer. Reality is duller and wiser. Deflection works best when done early and gently, with years to spare and tiny pushes that accumulate into safety. For threats discovered late, the options shrink, and late can mean no. The most useful investment is not in louder rockets, but in better eyes, better sharing, better practice. The payoff is strange. Nothing happens. No impact, no broken city, no dramatic footage. It is hard to budget for what you hope never appears, and yet there is maturity in doing exactly that. Even farther beyond the comets, wandering possibilities lurk in theory, and survey hints. Planets without suns, thrown free from their birthplaces by the rough politics of young systems. They do not glow. They do not reflect much. They move through a darkness that keeps secrets. Counting them is guesswork, mixed with clever inference. They are probably common, The galaxy is nothing if not exuberant in its experiments. The odds that one would thread the needle of our outer system and disturb the careful clockwork here are low on human timescales, but non-zero if you stare long enough. The mind balks at rearrangements so grand, Earth nudged closer to fire, or pushed toward a deep freeze with no dawn. But the physics is simple. Gravity is patient. And even brief encounters between massive bodies can rewrite futures. Holding that possibility does not mean living in dread. It means cultivating a habit of respect. We already practice versions of this respect in daily life building where floods don't argue, fastening shelves in earthquake country, knowing the route out before a storm season starts. At the scale of worlds, the same posture applies. Watch the sky, understand the orbits, map the interlopers, keep the technology resilient against the sun's moods. Be careful with the stories we tell ourselves about certainty. Leave room for surprise without surrendering to it. The gift hidden in all this sternness is perspective warmed by intimacy. Venus warns against arrogance about climate and reminds us how feedbacks, once strong enough, teach their own lessons. Mercury shows how a world without air and with a peculiar spin can wrinkle under stress and stage a sky to puzzle poets. Comets teach suddenness, asteroids teach statistics and patience. Even the rumor of rogue worlds asks us to think like archivists: protect, duplicate, diversify, decentralize, so that a single failure is not the end of a library. Each lesson can be taken softly, the way a bedside lamp can be loved without staring painfully into the bulb. Stories that begin in fear often end in resolve. Telescopes now roam mountaintops and deserts and space itself, opening their irises at twilight, closing against dawn. Algorithms learn the difference between a cosmic ray strike on a camera sensor and a real point of light that moves just so from frame to frame. Radar pings an incoming stone and listens for the echo to sketch its shape like a blind sculptor's hands. Astronomers hand off night to night, hemisphere to hemisphere, and a network appears, global, calm, iterative. On the ground, engineers quiet the vulnerabilities of grids. Operators practice what to do when a storm crackles through the magnetosphere. Manufacturers harden chips for satellites that must face the weather above the weather. It is the same texture of work that keeps bridges standing. Routine, unromantic, essential. Under all of this, the whisper that started the evening continues. The universe is not out to get us. It is busy being itself. We are the ones who can choose to be custodians rather than gamblers. When Venus is bright, you can let it be simply beautiful and also a bookmark for a chapter on heat, albedo, chemistry, and distance. When Mercury hides near the sun, you can think for a moment about a horizon where the day star pauses and reverses, about cliffs that rose because a small world kept breathing hot and cold in exaggerated turns. When a meteor streaks harmlessly overhead, you can let it trace awe across your chest and also file away its speed and angle, the way a birder notices both the color of a wing and the curve of a beak. Risk, scaled properly, becomes not panic but posture. It tells us where to place observatories, how to design missions that look inward toward the sun's glare, what wavelengths to favor when rock and dust glow against the cold. It guides curricula so that a teenager can explain why an atmosphere matters, what a magnetic field does, how a runaway can begin. It shapes treaties and budgets that fund prevention over drama. And it nudges the culture toward a quieter heroism, the steady maintenance of systems, the humility to build backups, the grace to celebrate uneventful days as victories. If, one long day, a comet rounds its last curve with intent, or if another Chelyabinsk writes its white line at morning, there is comfort in knowing that careful people have rehearsed what happens next. Sirens that do not lie, windows that do not cut, a grid that can island itself, fail gracefully, and stand back up. A sky survey report that lands in the right inboxes at the right hour with the right clarity. That is civilization at its best. The coordination of small kindnesses into large resilience. And then there are the nights when nothing urgent happens, which are most nights. The planets keep their appointments, the sun keeps its temper, the comets remain faint rumors at the edge. On those nights, it is enough to let the mind drift through nearby classrooms of possibility. A Venus that once had oceans, a Mercury that once had enough internal heat to tremble and wrinkle, an Earth fortunate to carry both air and field and water, and a moon to keep time. It is enough to feel the safe weight of blankets and to count breaths, not sheep, while knowledge holds the room like a gentle hand on the shoulder. We are a small species with a growing sense of scale, learning precisely how fragile our arrangements are and refusing to let that knowledge sour the taste of being alive. The sky is a theater of warnings and wonders. We're learning the exits and the lighting cues without losing the plot. Venus and Mercury, comets and asteroids, rumors of rogue worlds, each reminds us that the future is a craft, not a gift. In the quiet of this hour, the craft is simple. Pay attention, prepare gently, love what is here, and keep the lamps trimmed for whatever chooses to arrive. Settle back and let the night widen a little. Between the stars there isn't emptiness, so much as a quiet highway. And now and then, a traveler takes that road and brushes our doorstep before we've learned their name. One autumn not long ago, an unfamiliar streak appeared in our measurements, an interstellar guest later called Oumuamua. It slid through the inner system like a thin, tumbling shard, fainter than memory, faster than pursuit. By the time our telescopes understood what it was already leaving, moving too swiftly for any craft built by our careful hands to catch. A few years after, another visitor arrived, Borisov, this time a textbook comet from another sun, trailing dust and gas like a flag from far away. We had a little more notice, a better view, and still the lesson was the same. Space has traffic. The lanes are wide, the speeds are high, and our early warning lanterns do not yet flood every shadow. Not every stranger is natural. That is a possibility we carry softly rather than loudly, as one might carry a fragile cup across a dark room. A slender object could be an outgassed shard or a splinter of ice. It could, in principle, be an artifact sail, probe, husk, left by minds that learned their sky before ours. We have no confirmed examples, and that uncertainty is not a disappointment. It is a patient invitation. What matters is that an open system deserves an open gaze. We do not yet have a comprehensive bell that rings whenever something crosses the boundary of our solar neighborhood. For now, we keep watch with a patchwork of surveys and listening posts, improving their sensitivity and teaching them to notice motion against clutter, the way a seasoned sailor notices a ripple no one else sees. Look beneath your feet, and the theme continues. Ordered turbulence, doing the work of protection. Deep under ocean and continent, liquid iron circulates in Earth's outer core, and that motion writes a magnetic field that wraps us like a cloak. It is not static art. It shifts, weakens, strengthens, and, at long intervals, flips. The rock record keeps these reversals like careful pressed leaves in a book. Lava that cooled under ancient skies preserves the direction a compass would have pointed that day. Reversals are not switches thrown in an instant. They take hundreds to thousands of years, and along the way the field can grow lopsided and patchy, with multiple poles wandering and fading like lanterns in fog. During such times, the shield thins, more charged particles slip into the upper air, and chemistry pays attention. The ozone layer feels the stress. Radiation doses for high flyers and satellites shift. Auroras wander toward latitudes that usually sleep through them. We hear sometimes that a flip is overdue, a tidy phrase that tries to make geology keep a clock. The truth is gentler and trickier. Intervals between reversals are wildly variable. 780,000 years have passed since the last full flip, but the planet owes us no schedule. What we can say, without hand-wringing, is that the field's strength has changed over recent millennia, that a broad dent, called the South Atlantic Anomaly, complicates satellite operations today, and that living with a dynamic shield means designing with margin. Aircraft routes adjust when radiation swells on polar paths. Spacecraft electronics are armored and tested. Ground systems are built with storms in mind. The goal is not to fear a long process, but to walk through it with attention. Plate tectonics is another chapter in this honest book, a choreography so slow the mind forgets. It's dancing until, once in a while, the tempo jumps. Continents ride on the planet's conveyor belts and collide with old grace. Stress accumulates in the joints of plates, measured in silent millimeters each year, then releases in seconds that rattle shelves and sway bridges and change lives. Even the rhythm of Earth's spin is not perfectly steady. The 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake, vast and sorrowful, shifted mass enough to trim a few microseconds from the length of a day. That detail is not morbid trivia, it's proportion. We live on a body in motion, and our comfort is something we build, not something the planet guarantees. Some engines of change burn slow and deep. A supervolcano is not a mountain that chooses to roar on a whim. It is a region where hot rock gathers and waits beneath a cap, breathing in geological time. Yellowstone is one of these places, a restless system that has erupted greatly in the distant past and continuously vents, steams, and lifts the land by subtle measures you can track with careful instruments. Stories like to promise timetables every 600,000 to 800,000 years, as if volcanism were a commuter train. Nature is looser than that. What is true is that a large eruption anywhere on Earth, whether there or elsewhere, would rework the climate for seasons or years and complicate food on many continents. We have tasted smaller versions. In 1815, Tambora in Indonesia blew with enough might to shadow the following summer for much of the northern hemisphere. Harvests failed, skies went strange, poets wrote dark mornings into their books. Multiply that lesson, and you glimpse why scientists watch calderas with more curiosity than dread, measuring gas, ground, and heat to learn how to read intentions in the deep. All of these earthly mechanics fields, plates, magma, tell us we do not stand apart from violence. We are refined by it and protected by it and occasionally wounded by it. That same blend of risk and shelter colors the ideas we spin about leaving home for a very long time. A generation ship is a story about patience turned into architecture. A vessel where children's children would grow old under an artificial sky, carrying culture and seeds and songs between stars. Researchers who model such voyages do not deal in romance, they deal in numbers. They use Monte Carlo simulations, the statistical equivalent of rolling very many dice, to explore how population, genetics, and social fabric might behave over centuries. Those runs are sobering in the way honest forecasts often are. Diversity dwindles unless carefully managed. Knowledge drifts unless it is tended like a garden. Systems degrade. Leaders change. Small conflicts compound. Even under generous assumptions, stability is work, not a default state. There are baseline requirements that sound simple until you try to supply them for centuries. Enough people to keep a healthy gene pool. Enough redundancy in skills that one lost library does not dim the ship. Enough power, water, and space turned over through perfect recycling so that waste is not a creeping ruin. The numbers land in ranges that make the engineering dense, 5 to 10,000 souls at minimum for genetic safety, with all that implies about farms under lights, closed-loop air that must never fail, and governance that must remain legitimate through births, disagreements, pandemics, and grief. Those models stop at a few hundred years because computers and patience ask it, but the distances between stars, even between nearby ones, stretch that scale into millennia if you travel at humane speeds. A ship that can survive that long must solve not only propulsion and shielding, but culture, how to keep curiosity alive, how to keep repair skills from becoming ritual divorced from understanding, how to let dissent heal rather than fester. None of this is a scolding. It is the kind of gentle realism that lets plans improve before money and hope are spent. You can hear the echo back to our interstellar visitors. We could not catch Oumuamua, but we can build survey eyes that see earlier and farther, including infrared sentinels that scan near the sun's glare, where ground telescopes squint. We can teach detection software to recognize motions that betray a visitor from the galactic highway rather than the local lanes. We can practice how to share data across borders in hours rather than weeks. The same temperament, quiet, iterative, unglamorous, will help with long voyages. You create training that assumes boredom, not drama. You design education that renews itself rather than ossifies. You choose hardware that can be remanufactured from raw feedstocks aboard the ship, so that a broken pump is a chance to demonstrate competence rather than a prelude to despair. The comfort here is not in certainty, but in alignment. The universe asks for habits that also serve us at home. Vigilant surveying makes the planet safer today and makes us sharper for tomorrow's surprises. Understanding magnetic moods makes satellites sturdier and frames how we would shield a hull against cosmic rays. Learning to live with earthquakes drives better buildings in cities and teaches engineers how to damp vibrations in a long, thin ship. Keeping watch on calderas improves climate models and informs how to grow food under odd, shifting skies, skills that a closed habitat would prize. Practicing inclusive, resilient governance on Earth, where many voices are heard and the hard decisions are explained, prepares us for any community placed under glass for longer than any human has yet known. It is late, and all this talk of reversals and visitors and voyages could sound like a catalog of dangers. Let it be a catalog of preparations instead. Somewhere tonight, a telescope will pick up a moving point and send its coordinates along a digital string to other eyes, and a tiny change in a line of numbers will refine a path and tuck a future closer to safety. Somewhere else, a student will run a simulation of shipboard population dynamics and find a tweak that keeps diversity healthier across generations. In a lab, an instrument meant to watch the South Atlantic anomaly will be tested until it fails and then returned to the bench wiser, its next version a little calmer under fire. On a volcanic plain, instruments will listen to the ground, breathe, and a geologist will write an unexciting report that, in its unexciting way, protects a town. Between the stars, there will be other Oumuamuas we do not see, other Borisovs that arrive and are greeted like old teachers with new examples. Beneath us, the core will turn, the field will wander, the plates will argue and reconcile, the calderas will sleep and stir. In our minds, ships will cross imagined darkness while we measure what it would take to make them real without lying to ourselves about the price. The work is long, and the tone can stay tender. We are allowed to be drowsy while we think about big things. We are allowed to care about breakfast and also about interstellar trajectories. We are allowed to hold both the fragility of a magnetic shield and the sturdiness of people who, when told the field is changing, write better code, design wiser circuits, and talk to their neighbors about how to be good to each other when the lights flicker. Let the room stay dim. Let the sky lean in as a companion rather than a threat. Visitors will come from other systems and from the deep underfoot. Some will be lovely, some indifferent, a few harsh. Our task is steady. See them sooner, understand them deeper, respond with grace. That posture will keep the home we love more durable and will, if we ever decide to cross a darker sea, make the ship we build kinder to those who live within it. Breathe in slowly and let the scale widen until the Milky Way feels like a soft ribbon around the dark. Our whole solar system, sun, planets, comets, dust moves together around the galaxy's center at about 230 kilometers per second, completing a single, stately lap in roughly 225 million years. One galactic year for Earth is 1,000,000 generations of campfires and lullabies. Along that long route, we drift above and below the galaxy's mid-plane, crossing regions where the traffic of high-energy particles thickens, where cosmic rays tap harder on the top of the atmosphere. Some paleontologists, reading the fossil record with patient eyes, see a rough rhythm in extinction's peaks every 26 to 30 million years. Others push back. The evidence is mixed, like music heard through a wall, suggestive, not decisive. The careful takeaway is humble but useful. Our galactic path might sometimes put Earth in seasons of heightened stress, and life has endured those seasons before. Between those seasons, the sun sails through interstellar weather. Space is not empty. It's a thin quilt of gas and dust, stitched into vast, cold clouds. When we pass into denser lanes, the sun's magnetic bubble, the heliosphere, our large invisible windbreaker, can shrink. A smaller bubble lets more galactic cosmic rays slide inward, a change subtle as a new grain in the wind, yet real enough for satellites and upper-air chemistry to notice. Far beyond the planets, the Oort cloud sits like a faint, icy fog. A nudge in pressure out there, or a gravitational whisper from a passing star, can tilt a handful of ancient comets down toward the inner system, where blue oceans and green continents orbit in their reliable loops. Right now we're traveling through the local interstellar cloud, a slightly thicker patch. It isn't a crisis. It's a reminder that even the sun has a changing environment, and that Earth's shield, magnetic, chemical, and human, works best when we remember the wind can shift. Every few million years or so, we also pass relatively near other stars, near, in the language of astronomy, which still means a long, careful distance. Those flybys rarely threaten, but they can tug at the Oort cloud and seed the inner system with comet showers that last for ages. One small red star, Gliese 710, is on a path that will bring it to within about a light year of the sun in roughly 1.3 million years. That's close enough to stir the icy pantry at the edge, not close enough to crash our table. It's the sort of slow news the galaxy specializes in. Noted, modeled, filed for future centuries. No cause to lose sleep tonight. Other dramas throw their light from far away. A supernova within a few dozen light years could tear at our ozone and flood the surface with harsh ultraviolet, a hard test for the biosphere. That danger zone is small on galactic scales, and the nearby candidates are mercifully few. Bright, charismatic Betelgeuse, the red shoulder of Orion, has been fidgeting and dimming and brightening in ways that keep astronomers enchanted, but it's hundreds of light years distant. When it finally blossoms into a supernova, it will be a stunning sight and a safe one. The cosmos can be both spectacular and kind. Stretch time further and another kind of truth appears. Even without outside interference, the solar system has a touch of chaos in its bones. Planets tug one another, tiny changes accumulate. Over tens of millions of years, the precise future becomes sensitive to tiny differences in the present, a property mathematicians call chaos. Mercury is the skittish one. Its tight orbit, its closeness to the Sun, and the relativistic correction to gravity that comes with that closeness make its path just unsettled enough that, across billions of years, unlikely stories become barely possible. Some simulations give Mercury roughly a 1% chance of being flung outward or colliding with Venus within the next 5 billion years. 1% isn't much, and 5 billion years is deeper than language, but the whisper is there. Arrangements can change. In extreme branches of those futures, rearrangements ripple outward, and Earth's safe, mild path shifts inward toward heat or outward toward cold, not prophecy possibility. The kind that helps engineers appreciate how precious ordinary really is. Closer to home, the moon, the quiet metronome of tides and months, is slowly stepping away from us at about 3.8 centimeters per year. As it recedes, Earth's day lengthens grain by grain, and the stabilizing grip the moon puts on our axial tilt relaxes a tiny bit. Over very long spans, that could mean a wobblier planet, with ice and rain belts wandering more freely. Could is doing careful work here. Climate doesn't fly to extremes on a whim. The changes are slow, the feedback's complicated, the time scale measured in hundreds of millions to billions of years. The point is not to fear tomorrow's sunrise. It's to recognize that our present calm, the steadiness of seasons we've built agriculture and memory upon, is a gift from a particular arrangement that will not last forever, and does not need to, for our purposes now. The sun itself follows a life story written in physics and patience. As it fuses hydrogen into helium in its core, it brightens slightly with age. Give the clock about 1 billion years, and that gentle brightening may be enough to push Earth toward a runaway greenhouse, a slow Venus-style outcome, where oceans thin into steam, and steam traps heat, and the loop closes tighter with each passing century. That would end the surface habitability we know long before the sun reaches its grand old age. Much later, about 5 billion years from now, the star will swell into a red giant, its outer layers expanding to somewhere near the orbit of Mars. Mercury and Venus will go first. Earth might be engulfed, or might be stripped and charred in a too-close dawn. The giants farther out will endure the drama, but not without loss. Their atmospheres will be scoured, their icy moons remade. It sounds fierce, but it's simply the natural arc of a sun like ours, maturing into its last acts. Put all these sheets of glass on top of one another: galactic seasons, interstellar weather, passing stars, rare explosions, chaotic orbits, a retreating moon, a brightening sun, and you don't get a single alarm. You get a layered, honest portrait. The layers of danger are also the layers that stitched us together. Cosmic rays that spur mutations and occasionally creativity at the molecular scale. A helically breathing heliosphere that lets auroras sing at the poles. A moon that once steadied tides enough for chemistry to try 1,000 recipes. A sun that is as reliable as physics allows. Vast risks spread across vast distances and vast times, which is another way of saying there is room for wisdom. The fossil record's rhythms, if they are there, deserve cautious interpretation. The local interstellar cloud may wrinkle the sun's cloak a little. The cloak adjusts. A future comet shower would unfurl across so many generations that ecosystems could bend and rebound, and a spacefaring civilization, if we become one, would have centuries of warning and options. Scale does not erase stakes, it changes how we hold them. The hardest thing to keep straight is proportion. A single human lifetime is a candle flame. Orbital rearrangements and stellar weather are slow sunsets and dawns. That mismatch doesn't make our questions naive. It nudges our questions toward stewardship. Not, when is the end? But, how do we extend the middle? The answers are ordinary, in the best way. Better all-sky surveys that watch the plane of the galaxy with patient eyes. Infrared sentinels that can see near the sun's glare. Data routines that move quickly between observatories and countries. Spacecraft and power grids that are built with storms in mind. Cities that can breathe through a temporary shortage and come back gentler. In the long view, it also means archiving what we love. Seeds, stories, ways of repairing things so that choices exist later, whether on Earth, the moon, or somewhere with a different sunrise. Let the mind keep two ideas without strain. The universe does not owe safety. It's busy being a universe. We are not powerless. We are busy being human. The solar system will continue its swim through the galaxy. The gravitational whispering among planets will continue. The moon will step away by centimeters per year. The sun will grow a touch brighter by millennia and eventually blaze into a red giant. Between those steadfast inevitabilities and our very local mornings lies the space where we live, the part we can nudge, a survey built on a dry ridge, a new algorithm that notices a comet with an odd tilt, a satellite wrapped with one more layer of protection, a classroom where kids learn why a magnetic field matters and how to read a graph of the solar wind like weather. There is comfort in not looking away. Beauty and violence at galactic scale are two faces of the same clock, and the tick reaches us as softly as the light that paints your wall before dawn. While you close your eyes, the Milky Way keeps turning, the solar system keeps drifting, and Earth still, for now, keeps the temperature that lets blankets do their quiet work. Knowing the larger picture doesn't crush the small, it gilds it. Every supper shared, every porch light glowing in the mild evening, every laugh billowing through a kitchen happens while the big gears spin and, somehow, keeps happening. That is not denial. That is a tiny, sturdy victory repeated until it becomes a culture, attentive, prepared, grateful. If you want to hold a single sentence as the room darkens, the future is not a chapter waiting to be read to us. It's a craft we practice. The galaxy sets the tempo. We write harmonies in human time. We watch, we measure, we build with margin, we teach each other what the sky is saying. We do this not to outshout the stars, but to stay in the song a little longer, long enough for more children to learn the names of constellations, long enough for rivers to keep their seasons, long enough for us to become the kind of species that treats danger as information and time as a gift. Let your breath even out and feel the room settle as if the air itself were tucking you in. The worries of geologic epochs can rest on a far shelf for now. What waits closer to the bedside are threats sized to human history, years, decades, a handful of generations. They are not bedtime monsters. They are weather reports written in a larger font, and knowing them clearly is a kindness we can give each other. The simplest place to begin is with falling stones. Earth's surface keeps a quiet ledger of impacts, and the entries within living memory are enough to show the shape of the risk. In the summer of 1908, a body the size of a building arrived over Siberia and tore itself apart in the sky. The blast flattened more than 2,000 square kilometers of forest. Trees lay like combed hair, pointing away from a bright point that no one living had quite seen before. The energy released on the order of many megatons of TNT was felt across continents in barometers and in stories that lingered. A century later, a winter morning over Chelyabinsk gave the world a smaller, sharper lesson. Dash cams meant for traffic captured a sudden white streak, a growing sun, a long rumble. A fragment of rock, perhaps 20 meters across, arrived fast, broke itself high in the air, and sent a shockwave across 6 cities. Windows leapt inward. People stumbled, bruised by glass and pressure. The injuries were mercifully fewer than the spectacle suggested, and that is the whole point. Size and speed are a lottery you never want to win. The phrase, cosmic shooting gallery, sounds theatrical until you remember we have names and dates. We also have lists, calm, careful lists of near-Earth objects and their orbits, updated night after night by telescopes that don't mind the cold. Those lists are longer than they were last year and will be longer next year still, but they are not complete. Every so often, a new discovery reminds us that big things can hide in plain glare. In 2022, astronomers found a kilometer-class asteroid, 2022 AP7, sweeping in an orbit that crosses Earth's path region but stays harmless for now, a late-found neighbor the size of a mountain. That such a large object could remain unseen until recently isn't a scandal. It is a reminder that daylight and the sun's own brilliance hide things well. We are getting better at looking where the glare lives. Looking is only the first verb, nudging is the second. On a soft night in September 2022, a small spacecraft called DART met a smaller moonlet called Dimorphos and leaned into it on purpose. The hit was not about drama but measurement. How much would the little world's period change? Enough, it turned out, to prove that kinetic deflection works in principle. Europe's Hera spacecraft will follow to study the aftermath in loving detail, to weigh the shards, map the crater, and calibrate our models with truth instead of assumption. That's how engineering grows up, not with speeches, but with numbers. Still, our reach is short. We have no button to press when a large object appears late and angry. Kinetic impactors need time. Gravity tractors need more time. Even loud options need a clock that starts years early. The DART experiment was a demonstration on a small, compliant target with years of planning, not a dress rehearsal for an emergency. A real threat, discovered late, would ask for tools we don't yet have and for agreements we haven't yet rehearsed. That's not a reason for despair. It's a reason to focus on earlier detection and to practice the playbooks we hope never to use. That is why the conversation sometimes reaches for the word nuclear and then lowers its voice. A standoff detonation near a threatening asteroid could vaporize a skin of material and push the core with the recoil. Done early and cleanly, it might be enough. Done clumsily or too late, it could multiply trouble, turning one predictable strike into many smaller ones that still arrive. Fragmentation is not salvation if the calendar is short. Timing would have to be exquisite. Chain of command and international trust and clear treaties would matter as much as engineering. The better path is simple and boring. Find threats when they are faint and far, so that gentle options suffice. We need time, and time comes from finding them earlier. Eyes first, then hands. A dedicated infrared surveyor placed between Earth and Sun or in a Venus-like orbit can see warm rocks against cold space instead of trying to pick out dark stones against bright sky. Missions like that patient, unglamorous, are our best bet for decades of warning rather than days. Warning is oxygen. With it, even modest propulsion becomes powerful because weeks-long nudges add up to thousands of kilometers of missed distance. Without it, we are left with prayers to probability. We can do better than prayers. Impacts are not only craters, they are climate. Where a rock lands and what it hits shape the years that follow. An ocean strike would lift walls of water and send them racing. It would also inject steam and salts high into the air, where sunlight and chemistry might carve at ozone and tweak temperatures for seasons. A land strike in a place rich with coal, oil, or peat would loft soot and sulfates and unfamiliar organic tangles into the stratosphere. The sun would dim at noon, the world would cool. Crops would struggle, supply lines would creak, prices would rise like fever. You don't need catastrophe to break a city. A few hungry seasons can bruise a century. Computer models of dinosaur scale impacts objects 10 kilometers across or more point to decades of altered climate and difficult light. Even far smaller objects can write a bad season or two if they arrive in the wrong place at the wrong time. None of this is a prediction for a date on a calendar. It is a reminder that a global civilization lives on the narrow shelf between too much heat and too little light, and that shelves require maintenance. The other weather that matters does not fall from space. It flows from the Sunday. Our electronics are a nervous system stretched across continents and threaded through orbit. Geomagnetic storms reach into that system like a hand closing over a harp. Currents are induced where none belong. Transformers heat. Protection relays mistake the music for a fault and trip. In March of 1989, a modest storm darkened Quebec for 9 hours by driving unwanted currents through long power lines and saturating transformers into saturation. The grid tripped itself to stop the hurt. That was a small rehearsal. Larger storms, roughly once a century kinds, can tangle continents. Forecasting helps, but our warning time is measured in hours or a day or two at best. We watch the sun in many wavelengths and listen to the solar wind from upstream monitors parked a million miles sunward. When a coronal mass ejection, the sun throwing off a magnetized cloud of plasma, heads our way, we can put spacecraft into safe mode, reroute flights away from polar shortcuts, postpone a launch, and ask utilities to take protective steps. Those steps matter. They also reveal the limits. You can't rebuild a continent's fleet of high-voltage transformers overnight. They are custom, heavy, and slow to ship. A truly severe storm would not just blink lights, it would bruise GPS timing, uninterrupted satellite internet, precise navigation, finance, weather, and emergency communications, the unseen clocks behind modern life. The aurora that delights at high latitudes is the visible signature of this invisible wrestling, charged particles spiraling down field lines and making the sky breathe color. When those curtains are seen much farther south, the message is simple, even if the physics is not. The storm is strong, the shield is working hard, and the margin is thin. The Carrington event of 1,859 lit night skies at tropical latitudes and set telegraph equipment sparking, translate that into a world of GPS timing, satellite internet, long-haul grids, and space stations, and you see why space weather belongs in the same grown-up conversation as floods, fires, and earthquakes. There are darker hypotheticals, superflares, eruptions 1,000 times stronger than anything we've recorded from our sun, have been seen on stars like ours. They are rare there and, we think, rarer still here because of how our sun's magnetic cycles and rotation behave. Rare is not impossible. The consequences of one aimed directly at Earth would be ugly in ways we don't need to dwell on to take the hint. The hint says, diversify systems, harden the most vulnerable nodes, keep spares, practice recovery, and design systems to degrade gently rather than fail all at once. In the overlap between rocks and weather sits the question of food. Civilization is a garden with a long supply chain. A large impact or a severe solar storm would not just break devices, it would complicate planting, harvesting, storage, refrigeration, transportation, finance, and communication, all the invisible choreography behind the simple act of sitting down to dinner. History offers smaller sketches. Tambora's 1,815 eruption dimmed the next year into a summerless stretch that rippled across harvest calendars across the northern hemisphere. Volcanoes are not asteroids, but soot is soot, and missing warmth is missing warmth. The lesson transfers. Small margins matter. It helps to widen the lens to what we can already do without waiting for new physics. Early detection is a policy choice as much as a technical one. Fund the surveys, put the infrared eyes in space, keep the data open so many groups can cross-check and refine orbits fast. Practice decision chains. Who calls whom when a trajectory tightens? How warnings are phrased so that people act without panic? What thresholds trigger options from do nothing to evacuate coastlines to spin up a deflection attempt when warranted? Drill the scripts the way pilots drill checklists, calmly, routinely, until the motions feel ordinary. On the ground, resilience is built with nuts, bolts, and manners. Utilities can install devices that block geomagnetically induced currents, keep spare transformers staged and tested, and design substations to fail gracefully rather than catastrophically. Satellites can carry hardened electronics and safe mode scripts rehearsed as carefully as any pilot's checklist. Hospitals can maintain fuel for longer, and pharmacies can diversify supply routes. Communities can run drills that respect people's time and dignity. None of this requires panic. It asks for the same steadiness we bring to snow tires, smoke detectors, and seatbelts. And then, keep the tone human. We can talk about megatons and microseconds, but what we are really preserving are morning routines and lullabies. A city that weathers a solar storm with the lights mostly steady and the water still running is not lucky, it is well prepared. A community that hears a clear advisory about a meteor overflight and moves away from windows before the shock arrives is not anxious, it is informed. A space agency that quietly places a surveyor where it can see objects hiding in sunlight. That's competence, not luck. There's a temptation to rank threats like a top 10 list. It's better to think in layers and time horizons. Small impactors tens of meters arrive more often and can hurt cities. Medium ones, hundreds of meters, are rarer and can hurt regions. Kilometer-class objects are rarer still and can touch climate. Solar storms that bother power grids happen every decade or so. Ones that harrow infrastructure happen perhaps every century. The wild outliers sit under unknown but worth planning for. Each layer has a cadence. Our responses should match it. When people hear about nuclear options for asteroids, they sometimes picture movie plots. The reality would be cooler and quieter. If we ever needed such a tool, it would be because we did our math and saw that a standoff burst months or years in advance buys a safe miss with minimal debris. The device would push, not shatter. The governance would be international, transparent, and slow until it must be fast. And if we are fortunate, we will never need to do it at all, because our surveyors will have found the most dangerous objects long before they matter. Speaking of gentler methods, the gravity tractor idea is charming in its modesty. Park a massive spacecraft near a dangerous asteroid and let the mutual pull do the work. Fire thrusters sideways so the exhaust doesn't splash the surface. Wait. Over months, the asteroid's path shifts by kilometers, imperceptible now, crucial later. This is the temperament of all good planetary defense: slow, early, precise. It is also the temperament of resilience on the ground, weatherproofing substations, stockpiling replacement parts, and training cross-disciplinary crews, rehearsing quiet handoffs between agencies. These are gravity tractors for civilization, small, steady tugs that keep us in a safe lane. There is room, too, for the soft tools, education, and culture. Kids who learn why glass breaks on a shockwave, why you step away from windows when a bright fireball crosses the morning sky, why you don't crowd doorways during shaking. Become adults who help others without thinking twice. Utility workers who swap stories across borders after storm seasons become faster at identifying which transformers hum wrong before they fail. Amateur astronomers who feed sky survey pipelines with clean data help professionals spot genuine movers faster. The more neighbors who can read the sky even a little, the less room there is for rumor to do harm. When people ask about odds, it's fair to answer with calm honesty. Another Chelyabinsk-scale airburst is likely within a human lifetime. A Tunguska-scale event is possible. A direct hit on a city is unlikely this year, and this unlikeliness is partly skill because we look, because we warn, because we teach. A grid-scuffing solar storm is likely in any given decade. A grid-breaking storm is possible in a century. Superflares sit in the column marked, "We don't know, but we respect the tale of the distribution." We don't need to turn probabilities into nightmares to take them seriously. We need to translate them into budgets, building codes, and better habits. All the while, keep close to why this matters. A world resilient to space weather keeps dialysis machines humming and insulin cold. A city that understands meteor airbursts keeps children safe from flying glass and parents calm. An orbital survey that catches a dark rock early hands a future generation a quiet, satisfying non-event. Nothing happened because you watched. That is the kind of victory that doesn't trend but does accumulate into trust in institutions, in each other, in the simple idea that keeping watch is meaningful. The night isn't asking you to hold all the details, only their shape. We live amid modest, fixable risks and rare, vast ones. The small ones we meet with drills and duct tape and good neighbors. The larger ones we meet with telescopes, treaties, and patient engineering, plus a measure of grace. In the end, planetary defense is neighborliness expressed at species scale. It is sweeping the shared porch, replacing the porch light, and agreeing to keep watch while others sleep, knowing they will do the same when it's your turn to rest. Let that be the lullaby under the statistics, that the same hands that pour coffee in the morning can sign budgets for surveyors, that the same minds that balance checkbooks can balance risk and preparation, that the same voices that read bedtime stories can learn the difference between a warning and a rumor and pass the right one along. The sky will keep its habits, stones, flares, quiet stretches. We will keep ours curiosity, cooperation, repair. Between those two faithfulnesses, there is room for long, ordinary peace. Settle a little deeper and let the room keep you. The sky is not the only place where power gathers. The ground beneath your feet carries its own long, patient tempers. Even while you breathe evenly, Earth hums with motions too slow for nerves to feel. Heat rising, rock flowing, plates drifting, oceans trading warmth with air. We live on a calm skin, stretched over a restless interior. That restlessness can be generous, making continents, mountains, soils, and the carbon cycle that steadies climate. It can also surge. There are scars so wide, they read like whole chapters of a planet's diary. In Siberia, long before mammals learned to curl in dens, a province of fire opened again and again. Lava poured out not as a single theatrical eruption, but as flood after flood over hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine molten rock filling an area the size of a continent, not meters deep, but kilometers, each pulse breathing sulfur and carbon into the sky. Temperatures swung, oceans acidified, oxygen faltered, and most marine creatures vanished. On land, forests thinned into ghosts. That chapter, the end Permian extinction, was not a quick blow. It was a long fever driven by a planet's interior turned expressive, and it erased 9 out of 10 species in the sea and most on land. The numbers are stark, but what lingers is the scale, a kind of geology that dwarfs any human storm or war by factors that make language give up. Other pages rhyme. In India, layered basalts known as the Deccan Traps mark another time when the planet spoke in flows. Those outpourings overlapped with the day a rock from space hit shallow seas near what is now the Yucatan. Either insult alone would have strained ecosystems. Together, they likely braided their effects air full of soot and dust, light dimmed at noon, temperatures falling, and then lurching. Dinosaurs did not know the math. They only felt the weather turn strange and stay that way too long. It is sober to remember that Earth can roll 2 dice at once, interior fire and exterior stone. Earthquakes have their own language, faster and more personal. Plates don't glide, they stick and lurch. When a fault finally slips, the shaking is a conversation between rock and structure, and buildings answer honestly. The shaking can lift a wall, tilt a bridge, pucker a road. Sometimes the sea answers too, lifting itself into long, low hills that run fast and do not tire. Japan learned this on a March afternoon, when a deep fracture far offshore sent a wave landward, and the wave kept coming. The immediate harm was brutal enough. The afterharm unfolded in engineered places where cooling systems needed power that wasn't there. A nuclear plant lost its balance, chemicals spilled. Supply chains snapped like threads. One event, many after images. In the center of North America 2 centuries earlier, a different fault system spasmed 3 times across one winter, ringing church bells 1,000 miles away and briefly reversing the Mississippi's flow. The river corrected itself. The land shook off the dust. Today, that region is threaded with pipelines, rails, bridges, data centers. What was once awe would now be logistics. It can feel heavy to stack these episodes one upon another, but the weight has a purpose. Scale doesn't ask for fear, it asks for proportion. The asteroid that changed who ruled Earth's surface was not a unique freak, it was one role in a game that continues. Big rocks still wander. Flood basalts still happen, though we live between them now. Faults still wait, as quiet as cats. We, on the other hand, have been here briefly. Anatomically, modern humans count their time in the low hundreds of thousands of years. The stretch that contains writing, cities, budgets, and bedtime stories is shorter than the time light needs to cross the distance to our nearest stellar neighbor. Against that backdrop, it's remarkable that we've braided a global civilization tight enough to feel like a single organism, food grown here, feeding families there, raw materials crossing oceans to become shelter and medicine, information skipping along fibers of glass thinner than a hair. All that cooperation rides on assumptions so ordinary, we forget to respect them. Seasons that stay within the lines, engines that start when asked, chips that think without overheating, night lights that respond to a switch. Each assumption can be bruised by an event that doesn't care where we built our houses. A large impact doesn't argue, it lands. A supervolcano doesn't make a speech, it exhales on its own schedule. A solar storm isn't mad, it's physics. And it can confuse the long wires and precise clocks that run our days. None of this is an invitation to panic, it's an invitation to attention. Attention is hard work for a brain shaped by quick dangers. We are exceptional at noticing motion in tall grass. We are competent at trading, at making small stories that carry meaning through a day. But we are less skilled at holding in mind a risk that arrives once in a century, or once in 1,000 years, and yet deserves rehearsal. Psychologists have a tidy name for this habit, the availability heuristic. If an image comes to mind, easily a headline, a movie, a story told often, we tend to overvalue its likelihood. If the danger prefers the pace of textbooks, quiet graphs, sediment layers, ice cores, our minds underestimate it, even when the math insists. It isn't a moral failure. It's a side effect of being built to survive afternoons, not aeons. Media and memory conspire, gently, to aim our attention toward noise. A single dramatic act fills a screen. A decade of quiet work preventing disaster does not. We remember an airplane that fell. We forget the coronal mass ejection that sailed past, while satellites quietly reoriented and power companies performed small, practiced rituals that kept a city from going dark. Most people can quote details from a true crime podcast. Fewer can describe why a magnetosphere matters, or what happens to light in a stratosphere dusty with sulfate aerosols. That imbalance makes us more nervous than we need to be about the wrong things, and calmer than we should be about the right ones. Classrooms could help here. A child who learns how an orbit works, why an atmosphere warms, how a field flips, and what a fossil means, is a child who grows into an adult less easily spooked by rumor and more quickly mobilized by signal. The curriculum doesn't need more dread, it needs more awe and a dash of practical know-how. How to read a simple chart of solar activity, why to step back from windows when a fireball streaks at dawn, how to keep food safe during long outages, what a boil water notice truly means. The same lessons that build resilience against a storm build better neighbors. Even as we list what can go wrong, another truth keeps offering itself. Life is stubborn. The same earth that has vented oceans of lava has also nursed coral reefs into cathedrals. The same planet that has endured impacts powerful enough to light the sky around the world has also taught grasses to hold soil, trees to pump water and fog into rain, bees to choreograph orchards. After each mass extinction, the cast changed, but the play went on, and new acts opened with quieter protagonists, small mammals, then primates, then people who learned to sit by firelight and tell each other what the stars might mean. Resilience here is not a poster, it's chemistry and time. After the Permian crash, life rebuilt oxygen in the sea and buffered acidity grain by grain. After the Chicxulub strike, forests regrew from surviving seeds, and mammals filled niches with an energy that looks, in hindsight, like a preface. Today, resilience looks like seed vaults held in cold places, like grid components staged out of harm's way, like international data sharing that moves faster than pride. It looks like cities that plan for a week without power and manage to keep water clear and hospitals lit. It looks like families with a few extra cans and a hand crank radio, not because they're afraid, but because they like the quiet confidence of being able to help a neighbor. When people say, softly, that civilization is fragile, they are right. They are also leaving out half the sentence. Civilization is fragile in any given place and week. Across places and weeks, it is surprisingly elastic. Networks reroute. People drive across states with generators. Technicians sleep on cots near substations. Farmers keep seeds from the dry year and plant again. A factory somewhere else spins up. This elasticity is not automatic, it's built. It's the result of agreements, some written into law, others held in hearts that we will not leave each other alone in the dark if the lights fail. It helps to picture what cascades really look like, not to dwell on them, but to learn the weak links. An earthquake breaks a few bridges, trucks detour. The detours add hours, grocery stores run low, stress rises, rumor spreads, someone posts an outdated map, emergency lines jam. Help takes longer, because the roads are clogged with people trying to outrun a fear. Now imagine the same quake in a city that ran a drill. Bridges were reinforced years ago. The detour plan has clear signs. Radios are charged. People know their local shelter by name. A volunteer texts a picture of a cracked overpass to the right dispatcher. The official account on a trusted channel says, "Boil water on the east side until noon. Don't drive this corridor. Here's why." And people nod and adjust. Same magnitude, different story. The difference is culture. Culture can also teach us to look past the spectacle and respect the slow burn. The Permian story is big, but its lesson is practical. Sustained forcing changes the world. Greenhouse gases and sulfur blow their separate horns. Together, they can conduct a symphony. Oceans hold heat like memory. Carbon moves between rocks, air, and water in cycles we can nudge without noticing until we notice. The point of learning these patterns is not to carry anxiety, but to carry leverage, to know which choices matter most, which actions bend the long curve, which investments serve both the next storm and the next century. When talk circles back to external blows, asteroids, storms from the sun, it is tempting to put them in a different category, as if cosmic means beyond care. The truth is kinder. Detection is care. Patrol is care. Sharing data across borders is care. These are not cinematic rescues. They are small, repeated acts that build a world where emergencies are rarer and shorter. The same humility helps with interior threats. We don't command magma, but we can watch it. Think, measure, ground swelling, read gas ratios, map the warmth that rises under a caldera. We don't hush faults, but we can bind buildings to their foundations more lovingly and let them dance instead of snap. Perspective is the last tool, the one that keeps fear from swelling and keeps attention from thinning. When we see ourselves as latecomers to an old, lively planet, the right tone arrives. Gratitude without entitlement. We do not ask Earth to stop being dynamic. We try to stop pretending it is still. We ask ourselves to be worthy of a home that sometimes trembles and steams and glows at the poles. We move from what if everything ends to what helps most if something begins. We make lists that are gentle: water, light, medicine, a way to hear official news, a plan to check on elders, a spare charger, a little cash, copies of documents, patience. It's fair to ask whether reminding ourselves of deep past cataclysms helps at all on a Tuesday night. It does, in the way old family stories do. They put our own dilemmas in context. They loosen fear's grip on the wheel. They make us better at choosing steady improvements over dramatic gestures. The Siberian traps teach that scale and duration matter as much as intensity. The Deccan basalts teach that insults can overlap. The New Madrid sequence and Tohoku teach that geography spreads effects far beyond a red line on a map. The dinosaurs teach that dominance is not immunity. Our brief history teaches that attention is a superpower. And then there is the part that is always worth saying out loud. The fact that life kept going after so many endings should not dull our love for this moment. It should sharpen it. You are part of a chain that has passed through fires without names. The atoms in your bones were sorted in stars and storms. The language you used to think was honed by ancestors who told each other where the river floods and which hill holds in the wind. Everything you enjoy, by lamplight music, soup, conversation, exists because of 1,000 quiet survivals behind you and 1,000 quiet guardrails you barely notice. Knowing the dangers does not cheapen the evening, it gilds it. It says, look how much is still possible. So let the big numbers sit in the corner like old maps. A continent's worth of lava can pour from the same wound for 100,000 years. A fault can sleep for centuries and then speak a sentence that lasts 40 seconds. A rock from space can find shallow water and write a winter across the world. Set beside those, here you are breathing, warm, surrounded by artifacts of human gentleness, a kettle, a book, a screen holding a voice that cares enough to take you seriously while letting your shoulders drop. What follows from all this isn't a new kind of fear. It's an old kind of neighborliness scaled up. Fund the surveys that keep watch on the sky. Maintain the instruments that listen to volcanoes and faults. Teach the science in ways that make children curious instead of scared. Write building codes that prefer graceful failure to brittle pride. Keep spares where storms can't reach them. Test the plans. Share the plans. And when the news is quiet, which is most of the time, count that as a victory earned by many hands. If a thought is needed to hold as sleep approaches, let it be simple. Fragility and endurance are not opposites here, they are partners. This planet has ended worlds and started them again. It has also coddled tide pools into eyes and hands, and those hands now mend roofs and turn wrenches and point telescopes. The violence that shaped us is real. The patience that keeps us is, too. Between them, there is room for a long, ordinary life, gardens tended, streets repaired, children taught to name the constellations and the layers under their feet. Both settle into the hush and let the thought grow slowly. For all its tempers and whirlwinds, this solar neighborhood has held a long, improbable calm, just wide enough, just warm enough, just steady enough for cells to learn how to talk to one another, for bodies to try out eyes and fins and lungs, for minds to begin asking questions and writing the answers down. Out of shock waves and the slow tug of gravity, out of stellar ash and the pressure of time, something attentive has appeared. Intelligence is not a pause in the violence. It is the universe discovering it can notice itself. Consciousness is the brief candle a star-lit chemistry holds up to its own face and says, quietly, I see. Trace that light back and it passes through forges older than Earth. The iron in your blood was built when a massive star piled protons together until they could not be persuaded to fuse further. The carbon in your hands was shaped in a different furnace, and then the furnaces tore themselves apart and flung the pieces into darkness like seeds. Dust drifted and clumped, ice mixed with rock, lightning argued with oceans, and soon enough, becomes a few 100 million years, which is to say the blink of a galaxy. That same dust is now you, soft-breathing, blanket-warm, listening to a voice that cares about getting the details right without raising its tone. You carry the record of shocks and burnings inside you, balanced with lullabies and recipes and the instinct to protect what you love. The universe did not plan for sweetness, it allowed for it, and we did the rest. The storminess that surrounds us does not cancel meaning. It frames it. Peace under a sky that can change is not an accident to take for granted. It is a gift to treat tenderly. A sunset is not smaller because a coronal mass ejection could someday comb through the magnetosphere. It is larger because it is happening now, to you, inside this quiet room, while the big gears keep turning and choose not to grind here, tonight. A laugh with a friend is not frivolous beside history. It is the reason history matters. A new fact, a patient measurement, a page of clear writing. These are lights set carefully on the table while wind prowls outside. Fragility isn't a flaw in the story. It is what makes every chapter worth reading slowly. Beauty and force share roots. The rings of Saturn are a library of collisions that settled into grace. Ice and dust singing in narrow lanes, shepherded by moons, made legible by gravity's metronome. The aurora is storm weather in silk-charged particles scribbling along magnetic lines, turning a solar outburst into drapery that folds and breathes above cold water. A snowflake is a crystal grown from the bias of water molecules to clasp at certain angles, its branching a map of humidity and temperature etched in minutes. The same physics that cracks rock, braids rivers, and slings comets also threads sunlight through ice and writes six-pointed poems in the air. Destruction and pattern are twins. Knowing that doesn't make the dance less dangerous. It makes the choreography clearer. Clarity invites stewardship. The more we understand about the tempers of space and stone, the more honest our plans become. Not to flee Earth, this home is irreplaceable, but to loosen the single point of failure that any species faces when all its stories are told on one shore. Backups are not betrayals, they are what love looks like at scale. A greenhouse on Mars is poetry and plumbing in equal measure, water loops that never leak, soils coaxed from dust, crops chosen for calories and comfort. Rotating habitats where sunlight is allotted like a trust fund can practice agriculture as arithmetic, learning precisely how to balance air and waste and food until the balance becomes culture. Between stable points in the Sun-Earth geometry, long-lived stations could become small towns with careful clocks, places to learn how to make tools that make more tools, to print alloys that don't love gravity, to test ways of living that bring less harm to a blue world left unburdened. None of this is promised. All of it is possible if we keep our engineering modest and our politics patient. The same technologies that keep an off-world settlement honest feed life here. Telescopes that see warm rocks against cold space, giving us time to nudge them gently. Precise maps of asteroid makeup that turn space mining from a slogan into metallurgy. Manufacturing processes that prefer vacuum and microgravity, letting heavy industry pick up its smokestacks and move to places where waste can be entirely captured and reused. Solar power harvested above clouds and night and beamed down as soft, safe light. Comparative planetology that reads Mars and Venus and Titan like cautionary tales and inspiration notes, helping us steer Earth's climate with more wisdom. Each step outward returns something inward: materials, science, medicine for radiation, closed-loop life support that makes cities greener, sensors that let farmers choose water with almost musical sensitivity. The ladder away from a single basket is also a scaffold around the basket we have, bracing it, easing the strain, extending its life. The lesson beneath the hardware is philosophical and gentle. The universe is busier, stranger, and more volatile than daily life suggests, and we are a temporary arrangement of matter humming with the privilege of awareness. Temporary does not mean trivial. A song is temporary, and it changes the room. A bridge is temporary, and it changes two cities. We are temporary, and we can change the way a galaxy-sized machine is experienced by one of its parts. We can notice, we can repair, we can say, with actions more than words, that the existence of hazard is not a reason to love less. It is a reason to love more carefully. Step outside on a clear evening and let that care take the shape of attention. The bright lamp over the sunset is Venus, exquisite and inhospitable, a cautionary tale in a jewel's clothing. It is hot enough to soften metal. Its clouds would bite ungloved skin. Its pressure would press your ribs together like books on a shelf. The ember farther east is Mars, its landscapes written with the memories of strikes and rifts, its air thin, its water cautious. If you could read the ground fluently there, you would see how a magnetic heart that slowed allowed the wind to scrape the sky away. Later in the night, a banded giant rises, and with it a sense of proportion. Jupiter is weather as politics, storms older than empires, lightning that would make our loudest thunderheads blush, gravity that shepherds and shoves. And that chalky coin hung close our moon was born from a blow so hard the newborn Earth briefly wore a halo of its own pieces. That wound became tides. Tides became an hourglass that turned twice a day and helped chemistry try more possibilities than a still ocean would have allowed. Hold both truths gently. We live in a system that can end us. We live in a system that made us possible. The paradox is not cruel, it is fertile. Out of it grow conversations about how to keep the lights on through storms, how to store seeds where floods can't find them, how to train people to read instruments and one another, how to take very large numbers and turn them into budgets and drills and habits. Out of it grows gratitude, with a backbone, not the sigh that shrugs, but the nod that says, let's do the work. Doing the work changes what risk feels like. Asteroid catalogs grow. Survey telescopes blink their vast eyelids, night after night. Warning chains are rehearsed, so that when a streak lights the dawn, the glass doesn't cut, the words are clean, the help knows where to go. Utilities fit their substations with devices that drain away currents that don't belong. Satellites practice safe modes and then practice coming back. Hospitals store a little more fuel. Pharmacies keep a few days extra of the medicines that can't wait. Teachers slip a little space weather into earth science, a little orbital mechanics into math, a little emergency etiquette into homeroom. Step away from windows. Check on the older neighbor. Listen for the official voice, not the rumor. These are small things. They add up like drops that become a river. And if the river of time runs farther than our kind will ever see, it is still ours to row well while we can. The sun will brighten. The moon will step away. Orbits will precess and tease mathematicians. Galaxies will continue their slow ballet, sometimes graceful, sometimes rough. Somewhere, someone will watch a sky unlike ours and feel the same enlargement in the chest at a color without a name. The same quiet pride at a network humming back to life after a storm. The same tears at a song sung slightly out of tune around a table full of friends. Survival has never been only about teeth and claws. It is about carrying warmth through winter, carrying stories across dark water, carrying spare parts and the skill to use them, carrying the habit of repairing what breaks. If there is an ultimate sentence to pocket as the lights go softer, it might be this: we are not here to outshout the universe's chaos. We are here to harmonize with it, just enough to keep making mornings. That is why we study the hard things and still hang wind chimes. That is why we track rocks and still paint. That is why we budget for telescopes and still bake bread. The very forces that threaten also supply raw material for wonder. A ring system is a disciplined wreck. An aurora is a storm told in color. A snowflake is the smallest crystal palace. Each one says, you are allowed to be careful and delighted at the same time. When you look up again, and Venus is steady, when Mars glows like a coal, when Jupiter lifts and the moon applies a small blessing to rooftops, let the facts and the feelings share a chair. The violence that shaped those worlds and ours does not ask us to be afraid. It asks us to be awake. Awake people build early warning eyes and resilient neighborhoods. Awake people vote for maintenance. Awake people choose backup copies of what they love. Archives, seed banks, off-world greenhouses, redundant cables, apprenticeships that keep knowledge from thinning as elders retire. Awake people hold each other through outages, and afterward, laugh too loudly when the lights return, because that is what gratitude sounds like. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the quiet agreement forming underneath it all. Keep this going. Keep the room warm. Keep the sky worth watching. Keep the tools sharp and the tempers even. Keep the habit of explaining things without scaring anyone into silence. Keep the courage to say, we don't know yet, and the energy to find out. Keep the humility to learn from planets that failed and from ancestors who survived. Keep the sweetness that makes the numbers more than numbers. The universe is not gentle, and it is not cruel. It is grand and busy, and somehow it has given rise to creatures who can choose gentleness as a strategy. You are one of them. The atoms that have been smashed and scattered and gathered for 4.5 billion years are, tonight, a person lying quietly, practiced at breathing, able to love. Planets will keep sweeping their courses, fields will keep weaving, stars will keep spending their fuel and turning into memory. Meanwhile, we can keep the promises that matter on our scale, to watch, to prepare, to teach, to repair, to notice beauty, to leave more shelter than we found. Let that be the closing light. Not a door slammed against danger, but a window open to a night you now understand more deeply, where every risk comes partnered with a way to care, and every care returns as another ordinary day. The galaxy will not applaud, it will keep turning. But under that indifferent, applauseless turning, one small world will go on making breakfasts, charting comets, planting trees, pointing telescopes, writing lullabies that fold science into kindness. You can rest now. The stars will keep their watch, and so will we.